Okay, everybody, welcome to the program. This is the Otherppl Show, a weekly podcast featuring in-depth conversations with today's leading writers. I'm Brad Listi, and I'm in Los Angeles. Thanks for being here. I appreciate it. Hope you're doing okay out there, wherever you happen to be. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button wherever you listen, and you can follow me on Instagram and Blue Sky. So my guest today is Hala Alyan. She has a new memoir out called I'll Tell You When I'm Home. It is available from Avid Reader Press, an imprint of Simon & Schuster. It is a memoir about miscarriage and surrogacy and motherhood. It's about addiction and relationships, both intimate relationships and family relationships. It's about family history and identity. And it is also a book that is very much about exile and displacement and generational trauma. Hala Alyan is of Palestinian, Syrian, and Lebanese descent, and in her childhood she experienced displacement. She was born in the United States and lived here for a time before returning to the Middle East. She lived in Beirut for high school and college, and she now makes her home in New York. So, in many ways, I'll Tell You When I'm Home is a book about reclamation and selfhood and this idea of home, what it means to lose a home and what it means to rebuild a home. It's just a beautiful book, very lyrical and deeply felt and honest, and I had a great time meeting Hala Alyan. That conversation is coming up. Today's episode is brought to you by Penguin Press, publisher of Where Are You Really From?, the debut story collection from Elaine Shea Chow. This is a multi-genre collection that explores the limits and possibilities of storytelling. It features 6 singular stories and a novella. And Where Are You Really From? Is the official September pick of my book club, the Otherppl Book Club. If you want to sign up for the book club, you can do that at otherppl.com, get a new book delivered to your door every 30 days, and I interview book club authors right here on the program. So I will be talking with Elaine Shea Chow on the Otherppl Show in the weeks ahead. One more time, the story collection is called Where Are You Really From? And it is available from Penguin Press. So a quick plug for my weekly email newsletter before we get going. You can sign up for it over at bradlisti.substack.com. I will let you know about the latest episodes of the show, and I also share a list of links to things that I've been reading and finding interesting. If that sounds good, go check it out and sign up over at bradlisti.substack.com. I also want to give a quick plug to Deep Dive, my new company. It is now live. It's almost a month old. Deep Dive is a new learning platform that creates in-depth courses taught by leading experts. And the debut course from Deep Dive is called How to Write a Novel. So it's a very natural extension of the work that I've been doing on this program for a long time. How to Write a Novel features more than 50 hours of never-before-heard conversations with dozens of today's most celebrated contemporary authors who offer insight, inspiration, and instruction as to how to write a novel. So the instructors include writers like Emily St. John Mandel, Stephen Graham Jones, Melissa Broder, Steve Almond, Vivi Ganeshananthan Purachistahakpur, Hannah Pittard, Lynn Steger Strong, Debo Ununfirth, Jonathan Evison, Maya Binyam, Juliet Escoria, Alexandra Tanner, Elle Nash, Matt Bell, Madeline Lucas, Matthew Salisis. The list goes on. It's an all-star lineup, and it's an incredible writing course. It's sort of like taking an MFA, but at a tiny fraction of the cost. That's the idea. I want to make these teachings accessible, and you can get How to Write a Novel for 25% off if you sign up by Friday. The launch sale ends on Friday, September 12th. So, as this episode goes live, just a few days left with the launch sale. Don't miss out on the savings. Save 25%. Go get the course. You can do that at www.deepdive.audio and get your book done. This is the perfect companion to somebody who is serious about writing and is ready to get their novel done and get it published. So check it out, www.deepdive.audio. Okay, my guest once again is Hala Alyan. Her new memoir is called I'll Tell You When I'm Home, available from Avid Reader Press. Hala's other books include the novel Salt Houses, which won the Dayton Literary Peace Prize and the Arab American Book Award and was a finalist for the Chautauqua Prize. She also wrote a novel called The Arsonists City, which was a finalist for the Aspen Words Literary Prize, and she is the author of 5 acclaimed collections of poetry, including The 29th Year and The Moon That Turns You Back. Her work has been published all over the place, including in The New Yorker magazine, the Academy of American Poets, The New York Times, The Guardian, and Guernica, and she lives in Brooklyn, where she works as a clinical psychologist and a professor at NYU. I had a great conversation with Hala Alyan. I'm very pleased to be able to share it with all of you right now. So here we go. This is me in conversation with Hala Alyan, and her new memoir, one more time, is called I'll Tell You When I'm Home.
I have never sort of like undertaken a project that turned into something so completely unrecognizable from what it was sketched out to be. So the long story short is that I sold a collection of essays on a partial to the editor of this book. And I'd worked with her before, Lauren Ween. We'd worked together on Salt Houses and a little bit on Arsonists. And so I think we both just, believed in sort of the solidity of our relationship and that we have such a wonderful, working relationship. I adore her. We've worked just so kind of beautifully together before. And I think we both sort of did the same thing where we were just like, well, this isn't going to be the final product, but nothing's ever really the final product based on a proposal, and we'll figure it out. But then when I started trying to put together the essays, it was so discordant and so incoherent, and there was no unifying theme, and there was no real, I remember Lauren kept saying we're missing a spine. We need a spine. And so I'd be like, okay, I'm going to throw different essays at it. And that was just making it worse. And then slowly but surely, the project just started to take on a completely different form. And it was her who very, I think, gently and tenderly was like, well, what if we just start to write about what's happening now in your life, or some of the actual things, some more like facts on the ground, as opposed to writing, trying to mesh together these essays that were kind of philosophical musings on things like exile or displacement or dread or, and I think part of me was just so bewildered by that. Because on one hand, I was like, well, who cares about my life? It's my life. It's not interesting to me. And two, I was just I can't even imagine putting pen to paper about any of this. I can't even make sense of it as I'm living it. So I think that's part of what made it so hard, is that the project was supposed to be essays, became something more memoiristic, was going to be something more kind of poetic prose, fragmented a little bit, I've called it a Palestinian bluets thing that I kind of envisioned. That did not work either. It was just, again, it was really lacking cohesion. And it was when she urged me to just try to tell the story as it was, as opposed to keep trying to shroud it in these different angles. And then I started to do that. And then I was like, oh my God, I'm actually writing a memoir, which I never set out to do. And I'm moreover, I'm writing a memoir about life as it's sort of unfolding. So, the book ends and I'm not sure about what's going to happen with my marriage. I don't really know what mothering is going to be like. And that was exactly where I was as I was finishing up the book. I just didn't know how any of these things were going to go or how they were going to end. And so it was just, I think, I think one of the pieces of advice that I often give, or so many of us give writing students, is, write from the scab, not the wound, give it a second. There's a difference between writing for something that you are writing as coping versus writing as publishing, and the line for this project was razor thin, because I was really making sense of what was happening in my life as I was writing it. And then I was editing frantically because I knew that there were going to be eyes on this. Like, this wasn't just like a journalistic project. So that, I think all of those things came together to just make it just so complicated. And I think I was really there was like a little bit of a toddler in me that was like, I don't even want to write about this. I don't want to write about nonfiction. I don't want to write about my life. And yeah, I mean, it was really hard. It was really, really hard.
Was there stuff you felt like you might be avoiding?
Of course. Yeah. I mean, I was also avoiding my life. So it's like, I was in that moment, there were things, like someone had asked me something where it's like, was there something in the writing that then changed? Like, did the writing of it change then the course of actions that you took after? And the answer to that was like, absolutely. Like, I think I definitely was avoiding things because in writing the book, I started having to, in order to try to make a coherent narrative, I had to really start to piece things together that and notice a pattern that was emerging that I didn't quite care for in certain areas of my life, namely like relationship. And so I think it was also watching how the facts started to amass on the page that made it impossible for me to like not take in the fact that there were things that I was not looking at. And I mean, this is like I'm giving a roundabout answer. This is a fancy way of saying that I noticed that I had to edit out so many things because I felt like, oof, I can't put that on paper, or that is going to not, that's not going to sound good, or I need to give the context of this. And then at some point I was like, well, that doesn't feel like a normal amount of like editing of a story of a marriage.
What do you mean?
So, like, I think realizing how many things I didn't feel comfortable committing to paper about the relationship that I was in made it unavoidable for me to look at the fact that the relationship that I was in was not working. And I don't think that would have happened had I not been writing about it as it was going. Yeah.
I'm going to quote you to yourself. So apologies in advance. I think you'll actually agree with yourself. I'm just going to make a wager, but you say that my favorite part of writing, this speaks to what you were just talking about. Quote, my favorite part of writing is that it shows you if you're ready to do the looking or not.
Yes, I do agree with that.
And I feel like the fact that you were kind of writing this in real time, it seems like there's two ways of going about it when you're writing from trauma or you're writing from really difficult emotional experience or relational experience, is that I think there's some virtue to writing in the immediacy of the thing or close to the immediacy of the thing, because there's all this like heat and emotion and, it's right there. Yes. But sometimes you can maybe lack perspective, and that's what time can give. Like, what did you say, writing from the scab and not the wound?
Yes, totally.
But very impressive that you were able to put this thing together amid COVID while your daughter was in utero. I mean, were you writing this?
In utero, yeah. It was like she had just, I think what happened is because of the quote unquote Bluetsy structure that I was working on when I abandoned the more formal essay collection idea, a lot of that was written, yes, in utero, the first few weeks after she was born, et cetera. And then when I kind of stumbled upon I'm going to structure it after the months of pregnancy, then I just had so much of the data already. Like, I already had so many of the sentences written, so to speak. And then it just became a matter of like piecing it together. Again, I've said the word coherent maybe 30 times already, like finding ways to cohere things and finding ways to like stitch them together. And I think that act also forced me to try to make sense of things because I couldn't. Yeah. And I agree. I mean, what you're saying about the immediacy is totally true. Like, I definitely think it's a book that is raw. It's real honest, almost because I didn't have enough time not to be honest. You know what I mean? Like, I think I might have edited myself more heavily, but I was really I'd already pushed a deadline once. Like, I've never had a writing or publishing experience like this before where, I felt the kind of tick-tock of the clock in such an acute way. And so I think, yeah, there's definitely some perspective that is missing, but I do think there is such an urgency to how it was written that it is it's an interesting kind of like artifact of that time in my life that now is in the world that would not have been otherwise. And also, I do think my censoring of myself would have been really different now. So if I wrote this book now, as I'm like getting a divorce and there's like a completely different understanding of so many of these different factors. And like, I do think it would be probably a little bit more of a brittle book. I think there would be less generosity in it. There'd be less love in it. Like, I do think I am kind of grateful that it was, even though it was a story of a marriage that ultimately did not work on some levels, while it was also a story of like, displacement, while it's also a story of how to become a mother, all of these different things, the relational part in particular was, I think, benefited from the fact that I was still not sure what was going to happen. And therefore it was written from the perspective of somebody still in a thing and still kind of rooting for something. So yeah, I even from like a very small micro thing of like, I would rather my daughter, if she reads this book, I would rather her read this book in, 20 years than the book that I might write today in a much different state of mind, which again, in 5 years, I'll be in a completely different state. So there is something, I do think it's kind of this last artifact of that like headspace.
Yeah. It's like books are snapshots, and
that snapshot's gone now, but it's very sweet, but it's sweet that like, if I had to take that snapshot, that it was narrated by that perspective, I think.
I got to say too, just as like a sidebar, that I would guess that about 3 out of 4 of my guests on this show over the years have made some kind of attempt to write their version of Bluets. It's right at the
You just gotta. I mean, I also think I was just like, well, that's the thing about Bluets is like, there's such to go back to the idea of what stitches something together, it's done really, really both in an incredibly obvious way, because you're like, oh, it's about this one thing, but then it's actually so subtle, the thing that's tying, vignette after vignette. So it's just, my point is, it just seems deceptively like it's going to be like, it's deceptively simple seeming.
That's right.
But it is absolutely not.
It's the allure of collage, like literary collage.
Exactly. And everyone's like, well, who doesn't know how to collage? And it's like, well, no, the point of collage is that you're not supposed to see the effort behind it.
It's hard.
Yeah.
To make it work. That's why you were using the word cohere like repeatedly. I totally get that.
So I'm like, how do you do it? How do you do it while something is just not, it's not obeying that demand or that desire to like come together?
Oh, I'm wondering too, you talked about how you have this great relationship with your editor who kind of saw you through this project and its evolutions. And considering the speed with which you were working and the immediacy in which you were working and the deadline against which you were working, did you find yourself leaning on her? I would want somebody to be a sounding board if I were putting something really intimate to paper at speed.
Yeah.
Was she checking you more than usual, or were you just kind of trusting yourself?
Once like the format that it ended up being published in arrived, meaning the months of pregnancy, sort of like preconception, conception, month 1, et cetera. Once we landed on that, it really flowed. Because again, by then, so much of it had been written. It was just written in these different forums and I didn't know how to like stitch it together. But I think before that, what it looked like was we'd have a meeting. We'd be like, okay, the last version wasn't quite working. I'd come up with a new idea. She'd say, go for it. I'd go for 2 months. I'd work on it. We'd have another meeting, be like, something about this still isn't working. We'd say, okay, here's a new idea too. So it was, we did like a few iterations of that where I would kind of go off and do my thing for a couple of months and then we'd kind of reconvene. So it's funny because at the time I was like, it was head-bangingly frustrating, because it just feels like lost time on a project that I don't even know that I want to be working on. Right. So it's like, it just felt like I was like, this isn't even working. Like I'm pouring my heart out here and it's still not like congealing in a way that's satisfying. But in hindsight, nothing's lost because it was as if I was being given a series of writing prompts or you know what I mean? Like exercises, which I was not the intent of the meetings, but it was as if I was being told like, go work on this prompt. Now forget about it. Work on this prompt. Now forget about it. Work on this prompt. Now forget about it. And then when we came up with the structure, it was like, okay, now go bring everything you've done. And now you're going to understand why you did all of that. So it was one of those things that in hindsight was like profoundly wise. I do think we were both kind of fumbling in the dark at the time though, but then it worked out beautifully.
That sounds familiar.
Yeah. But isn't that what I was going to say? Is that not the process of making anything where you're just kind of like, I don't know what I'm doing. This might be terrible. No, I love this sentence. I want to burn all of it down. Like, and I think I think the reason I'm quoted as saying like, this is the hardest thing is because I've just also to do that under contract is a particularly stressful experience.
Yeah.
You know,
people
like
are counting on you.
People are counting on you. People have given you money, like people, you know, and like, I think there's that element of, I have never had that before, where like, I've definitely fumbled, like I mean, the first novel that I ever wrote, who knows how to write a novel? You learn because you write one. So the very first thing you do, you have no fucking idea what you're doing. And I was really just like, I mean, there was no outline. I would wake up and write a scene that I wanted to write, even if it was taking place 20 years after the scene I'd written the day before. Like, it was complete chaos. But there was no eyes on that process. I was accountable to nobody about it except myself and the story that I was trying to tell, you know? So that was also the thing that made this really different, is that I was, you know, I was like, you're being surveilled.
Yeah. Well, you'd had some success. I mean, you know, you were a more of a known quantity.
Thing, yeah.
And so there's this, I mean, you won the Dayton Literary Peace Prize, right? And like, so it's like, how's she going to follow this up? That's part of the equation.
Yeah. And I think that's there was a strange moment when I started working on the second novel where I was like, the experience of salt houses will never be recreated, because there was no agent, there was no editor, there was no audience, there was no readers, there was no, you know what I mean? Like, that's it. That was a one and done, you know? Yeah. And like, there is something to that that's like kind of bittersweet, because it's like such an honor and such a privilege to have, you know, people reading or to be represented or whatever. But like, it does kind of mean you have to start coming up which is a big part of what my life has been the last however many years, is like I'm constantly trying to find new ways to trick myself into pretending there's no audience.
Yeah. I mean,
anonymity. That's the only way I can really get it out.
Right. Yeah. Anonymity. It's like people bristle. It's like, God, when am I going to be discovered? And then they get discovered and it's like, man, I miss my anonymity when I was free.
You can just play more in anonymity. You know what I mean? Like, there's just something, I mean, that's how it is with everything in life, right? The same thing that makes it frustrating is actually the blessing nestled in it. And like, that has been very much the experience, where like now the blessing of having people like, and you know, people that can be sounding boards and people that are going to advocate and champion your work. It also means, you're held to account to other people in a way that you're just not otherwise.
So the structuring of this book, you've talked about it a little bit so far, but I want to just kind of make sure that people listening who haven't had a chance to read kind of understand like how this thing is built. It's essentially built around the surrogate pregnancy that culminates in the birth of your daughter. It's like a pregnancy structure, right? Yeah.
So it's essentially structured around, so it's basically like preconception, conception, months 1 through 10 of pregnancy, and then, you know, birth, then postpartum. And it's following the pregnancy, not in my body, but in the body of the gestational carrier, of the surrogate that carried my daughter, after years of miscarriages and an ectopic pregnancy and all of these different things where my body just was really not able to carry like a life to term. And so my daughter is biologically ours, but then was carried by a wonderful woman in Canada, still kind of in the COVID era. So I actually didn't meet her until the day she gave birth. So even though we were in contact, you know, constantly kind of throughout the pregnancy, there was just a woman that was in another country that was, you know, I mean, I listened to my daughter's heartbeat for the first time via like a FaceTime call. You know, or I'd like she'd put me on speaker and I'd ask the doctor questions. So it was just like a really wild experience. And then the day that I met her, and like the very first time I felt my daughter laid a kick, and then a few hours later she was in labor, and that was it. I mean, it was like it was a really wild, very, very specific experience that like there's not much to talk about blueprints. Like there's not much of a blueprint for it. And it was to be in the room during the birth and to be so like, it's not happening to your body. And I think after so many years of my body being the source and the site of a lot of joy, a lot of grief, a lot of longing, a lot of yearning, a lot of, you know, broken hearts, like lately there's so many things that I'd kind of attached to my body. I write about this in the birth scene where it's like, I wasn't taking jewelry off. I wasn't putting a hospital gown on. I wasn't getting my blood drawn. You know what I mean? Like I was just a person in a room, and like someone else was doing the pushing. And then on the other side of that pushing, I was completely transformed. And it was really just, it's like very hard to even like articulate what that feeling was like.
Yeah, I can't even imagine. Well, I kind of can't imagine. My wife and I went through 5 miscarriages too.
Oh my God, I'm so sorry.
Yeah. So I know, like I've related very much to the story. And then we finally conceived and had a baby, and he was born with a bunch of disabilities. It's just
God.
Yeah, I've been down this road, and we didn't do surrogacy, but I totally, felt for you in that experience. And it's hard, it's
so hard.
It's a strange kind of grief to like lose a child in a pregnancy that's like it's like an embryo, and it's like, well, how much of a person, it's like,
that's
does
the
it count?
thing. Does the grief count? And how many losses do you have to have before you can grieve like a mother grieves? Is also like, there's like the math of like, what does it mean to like, what belongs to you? You know what I mean? What can you claim of the sorrow? And I'm so sorry that you both went through that. And did you feel supported while you were going through it? Like, did you feel like the two of you had?
I mean, I guess.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like there's only so much people can say or do. It's just like like the thing about it is that, and this is something I didn't realize. We had our daughter, and that was like kind of a no problem. We got pregnant, we had the baby, it was fine, and then we went through all these losses. And
the losses were after your daughter.
They were in between our 2 kids.
Oh, interesting. So secondary infertility. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, and I was like, oh my God, like after the first miscarriage, pregnancy becomes a lot less fun. Like the first pregnancy was just like, oh, look, she's kicking. And like,
it's exciting.
There she is. It's just exciting. And like, you're just looking forward to it. And then you lose one, and then you lose 2. And then it's like, then you get pregnant again. And then it's like, oh my God.
It's tinged with terror, right? Because now like every milestone, you're like, it's not like you're racing it. You're just trying to get to a finish line as opposed to just having an experience. It's a really different. And I remember kind of projecting that quite a bit onto the surrogate, like where, like there'd be like an upcoming test or the 20-week whatever scan or things like that. And I would just be like, good God, let's see. We don't know. Let's not even talk about it. And in Canada, I think in most places, like surrogates have to have already had biological children of their own. So this is someone who had like really straightforward experiences. And so just to like, it was really interesting to see her also move through the world in a completely different way, and actually really put me at ease, because it was interesting to be like, oh, I'm so used to thinking something's going to go wrong, but here's a person who's just like, why would something go wrong?
Yeah. My maternal grandmother had 9 healthy babies.
Exactly. Yeah.
Into her 40s.
Yeah.
She had her last kid when she was like 42, just like no problems.
Just no worries.
And like, knock on wood, they're all still alive.
That's amazing.
And like, I'm just like, some people can just do it. I don't know why, but it's like, they just have a knack.
They can just do it. Yeah, they can do it. Yeah. And that's the thing is, you don't like, in a way, I mean, I've always said, I really thought I would be such a much more, and actually it'd be interesting because had I carried to term eventually, right? Had I biologically carried or had I physically carried, I wonder what kind of parent I would have been and how it would have been different. Because by the time my daughter was born, I had to do the exercise of letting go of control so thoroughly. Like, is there a bigger act of letting go than being like, hi, person I don't know, here's the most precious thing I can imagine. Please take care of it for the next 10 months.
I mean, yeah, you talk about this.
Like,
you say this in the book.
Just try to eat well. Try not to do, please. And also, I'm in another country. I can't oversee anything. I have no idea. You know what I mean? I just have to fully trust you. And I'm not a trusting, like, that's not my personality. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not like I'm a relatively suspicious person by nature. So it was such a, talk about a wild gift, because it really, by the time my daughter was born, I was like, I mean, she's going to be fine. So things that I would have expected myself in other circumstances to be really anxious or helicoptery or like, like hovering around her, or like, she's a fragile little thing. I was surprisingly just like, you know what? She's going to be fine. Things are going to be fine. So I am a much more laid back parent than I ever thought I would be, because my very first entry point into parenthood was having to be like, you know what, just let's hope for the best here.
And, you can't, like you say in the book, you can't really, it's like this gift that this woman has given you that could never possibly.
Unrepayable. You can't even begin to. You just have to accept, like, is there, and again, like, what is more humbling than being given something that there is quite literally no way to, quote, settle the score on?
Yeah.
And then you're just like, well, I just have to exist in awe and gratitude.
Well, this is a book, I mean, to go back to this idea of coherence, it's a book about a pregnancy and a kind of a struggle to become a mother. Mm-hmm. It is also an addiction memoir of sorts. It's a memoir about a relationship that's kind of up and down and might be coming apart. It is a family story and a family history.
Yes.
And it's about exile and displacement and identity and home. I mean, these are kind of the themes that occurred to me anyway as I was writing or as I was reading it. And I'm imagining they occurred to you on some level as you were writing it.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because it's such a, like, I think when talking about it or when inviting me to do things, I think there's so many different angles because you're right. It is also an addiction memoir. And so it could be like, that can be the theme that leads with it. It's certainly a memoir about Palestine and displacement. So that, I mean, very relevant right now. So like that can be a theme that leads with it. A pre-divorce memoir in some ways, like very much about infertility, very much about mothering. It's funny because it's not, like I was saying earlier, where when you're writing so urgently and so close to, you're cutting so close to the bone because there's also kind of time constraints. I almost found that I told the truth more thoroughly than I would have otherwise. Like I didn't have time to edit myself or to modulate kind of tone or really think about how something might come across. So it's a much more honest book than it might have been had I had more time to sit with it, which I'm quite grateful for actually. But that also means that I didn't have time to really think about the hook or the angle or like what is thematically at the core. So what ends up happening is I'm just telling the story of my life, as I'm sort of like making sense as I'm waiting. Because yes, the structure is around pregnancy, but then all of these different things are happening in that year, right? The relationship is kind of falling apart. There's the anniversary of the port explosion in Lebanon. There's what's happening in Sheikh Jarrah in Palestine. There's like all these like landmark things that are happening in that year that then are portals and entry points for me to really think about like my family history, my own background as somebody that lived in the States, then lived in the Arab world, then came back to the States. So I did my high school and undergrad in Beirut, and like really thinking about as I'm watching this country, fall into financial disrepair as my grandfather is dying there. There were all these things that were happening in this year that just were natural openings into, I guess, reflection, stitching together, bringing together memories. So it ends up just being about all of these different, I really think of it as like the year of like taking stock of my life to sort of prep for introducing this new human, into my world and into my home. And so, that just kicked up all of these different things.
Makes psychological sense. And I feel like I've had conversations over the years with a lot of people, especially women, but I mean, it could be men too. Like the months or the year leading up to the arrival of a child, especially maybe a first child, like books often get written in that time because there's like this sense of like taking stock, but there's also this sense of like, when am I going to be able to write again?
The urgent, the kind of scarcity. Oh, well, and also I think it's interesting because I do reference this I can't remember if we edited this out or not, but like there's a friend of mine who also happened to be pregnant during that time. And we were, part of the book is there's a lot of motion. So there's a lot of motion in the telling the story of displacement and exile of my family, but there's also quite literally just, we are, Johnny and I are traveling, right? So there's like a whole month where we're in Mexico. And then there's, this like, I come really close to my addiction history and a relapse and things like that. And I remember her saying to me, this friend being like, well, shouldn't you be nesting? Like in these months right before the kid comes, like, shouldn't you be like, I don't know, like hunkering down? And it was interesting because my body, what was happening wasn't happening in my body, right? So I could do whatever I wanted until the day was born, the day the baby was born. And I couldn't nest in the traditional way, like it didn't make sense for the way that I was entering parenthood. But what I was doing, I think in the writing of the book, eventually I realized was like really taking stock and like psychologically nesting. There was, I might not have done too much of the like, let's get the nursery ready, because I was frankly superstitious and it felt like an experience that was removed from me. But I was doing quite a bit of like, what kind of life do I want to be able to offer? What am I going to make with what I've been given? You know, what kind of mother am I going to be, having been somebody that's had X number of experiences of trauma or sexual violence or displacement, or having had my family's history impact me in all these different ways. I think it, yeah, there was, and I remember just kind of not knowing how to articulate that to the friend, but it took me a while to be like, oh no, I was nesting. I was just doing a very different kind of nesting.
That's interesting. Maybe it's like common for mothers who have children born via surrogate to have maybe this like different kind of nesting.
I wonder. It's an experience that mirrors oftentimes the non-birthing partner. You know what I mean? So either the father in a cis relationship, right? Or the non-caring parent in like a queer relationship, or whatever. So it's like, it's not that my experience was wildly unblueprinted or unknown. You know what I mean? It's not like it's something that nobody, it's actually just that it's not that common as a person that was at the time in a straight relationship, right? Like the quote unquote wife, the quote unquote mother, for me to be the body in the room that wasn't doing the laboring.
Yeah.
Like that's the part of it that kind of flips the switch, right? But I know, I mean, I have many like, you know, I mean, I've very recently a male friend of mine who's straight, who's, you know, like watched his wife give birth, right? So it's like, it's not like that really, that experience doesn't exist. It's just like with the identity markers that I have, that's what kind of made it just feel, I remember the whole time being like, am I going to get in trouble? Like as we were getting ready for I'm like, should I be here? Should I be standing here? Is this okay? Like it was just such a, and then that does something to think of like Maggie Nelson writing about like, you know, just like queering the family, of like what it means to queer these different roles and to really question and think about how we show up for these different like life roles, you know, and we're kind of told that there's a way that you're supposed to do it in a way that it's supposed to look, but that is constantly unraveling for so many of us for so many reasons. And so, yeah, it was wild. It was, yeah, like I still can't really talk about it. I'm just like, it was such a, yeah, I think I say in the book, I'm like, and then time just stop doing what time does. Like it was, I've never had an experience of time as I did in that room. I still like some strange, surreal part of me still feels like I'm still in that room. Like, and she's still coming to, and like, I'll never not be in that room. Like there's just something that happened that was such a, like, it glitched everything in this really profound, gorgeous way.
Well, you say, I'm going to quote you to yourself again. You say, I think some memoirists' projects are truly about recollection. And I think this one ended up being more about archiving and capturing. And I think this book speaks very beautifully to this idea of like a family line or like an ancestry being a kind of story that we carry and that gets passed from one generation to the next.
Right.
And so I guess I'm just wondering, like, when it comes to archiving and capturing, was all this stuff kind of available to you? Did you find yourself having to, like, were you reading grandparents' old diaries or anything like that?
That's a great question. Well, no, I mean, that's funny. I think so many things were lost from my family because of the multiple displacements. So there aren't really that many objects of recollection, you know? So no, I think what I did was I relied quite heavily on story, like oral storytelling. So like, you know, you talking to my father, talking to my aunt, talking to different family members. Most notably absent from that list is my mother, aside from a couple of stories, because she, you know, my mother is like infamously quoted several times in the book as saying, you better not be writing about me and you better not be writing about any of this. And so at some point, this is a very, I think, like funny thing that happened, but she figured out that I was in fact writing about the family. And I got put on a story embargo. She was like, I'm not telling you any more stories. And I was like, no, I need the details. I need to be. So there's actually certain parts of the book where I have to write around things because I quite literally couldn't get an answer about, like, you know, my maternal grandparents have passed. Like there's not, like, my mother is the eldest, so she knows the most of. So I quite literally couldn't get responses from her about like just certain concrete facts. Cause she was like, well, if I don't tell you the story, you just won't write it. And I was like, that's not true. I'm still going to write it, but I'm going to have to like tell it slants a little bit. So that I would say was, you know, one of the things that kind of became a little bit of a challenge was trying to reassure suspicious parties that I was in fact handling the stories with care and with like tenderness and, respectfully. On the other hand, my dad was just like, take it all. Here's another one. What else do you want to know? And he would very much encourage me to contact his older brothers, so my uncles. So there was a lot of that. There was a lot of kind of like, I'd already done a fair amount of research on the kind of journalistic facts on the ground, political history for my novels, right? Because they're both like, they deal with like Lebanon and Syria and Palestine quite a bit. But this was more just having to see who was willing to tell me what. And then it was just really interesting to see like where, and I've been asked this before by like, I did this event with another Arab writer recently, and they were like, culturally, it's like not that, like it can be frowned upon to tell certain stories or like air dirty laundry. And how did you kind of navigate that? And I think for me, my metric of whether I included a story was like, did it directly impact me? So if there's a story that felt like it might be a little loaded or charged to tell it, it needed to belong to me in some way for me to include it. And so the story of the quote unquote, there's like a thread about like this quote, like I call him the bad boyfriend, but this really traumatic experience I had with a relationship in my college years. I don't think that's a story that people in my family wanted me to tell for numerous reasons, but that felt like that's mine. That happened directly to me, and I need to be able to author it however I need. So yeah, that was kind of like how I decided what to put in, what not to put in.
So just to kind of give people, I mean, you've spoken a bit about it, but I think it's important to sort of flag, like you are of Palestinian, Lebanese, and Syrian ancestry, yes. And you lived, and there's been a lot of displacements, like multiple displacements in your family history, and you had a kind of peripatetic youth. You said you went to like high school and undergrad in Beirut. Prior to that, you were born, like your mother flew, I think, at 8 months pregnant to Illinois, and you were born in the United States, right. And then lived in Oklahoma. And then I want to say your father's family was from Palestine, and you had
my father was born in Gaza and Gaza.
Yeah.
And then they moved over to Kuwait. And then during the Saddam's invasion of Kuwait, there was another scattering of the families that were in Kuwait. So there was like kind of that second displacement then. And folks were, went to Amman, they went to Kansas, they went to some state in Kuwait. Like everybody sort of yet again went through another iteration.
And this is something that your book speaks to really beautifully. It's like the effects of these kinds of displacements and the trauma that you carry. There's right. Memories of you and I think it's you and your mother fleeing.
From Kuwait. Yeah.
And it's just
during the invasion.
It's harrowing, and it's the kind of thing that as a child would be scary, but maybe like there's also a piece of it that you're like not fully able to understand, because I imagine your parents are trying to protect you. So it's like,
of course,
and yet you're intuiting, that.
Well, you're seeing the people around you be afraid. You're seeing your caregivers be. I think that's probably one of the most disorienting thing for a child is to see their parent be terrified. Because then even if whether or not you know exactly what's happening, you just know that something terrible is happening. And you don't have language or a context or a sort of organizing way of looking at the world yet.
And it's also important to flag that this book was written pre-October 7th.
Oh, yeah. It was even it was also like drafted pre-October. So like there were the months after, because I had like, trying to remember when I had to hand the final draft in. It was probably a few months after. And it was like that time could just be really used for editing and doing final edits and things like that. And like all of the slaughter and the like, the burgeoning gems, like everything started and it was just like, nothing is important but making the stop. Like this is now the most pertinent, urgent thing that I can think of writing about. And so there was a part of me that was like, this is such a frivolous little story. I need to find a way to, and then I think two things happened. One, I was like, it's actually kind of, I don't know. There's something centering about that, about being like, no, I don't know. It felt like I was then making it about myself to be like, now I need to write about this thing in this book that like chronologically ends in 2022, with the birth of my daughter. So it ends before, but I think also it was just operating from a scarcity mentality of really thinking about like, as though this is the last time I'll be able to write about anything, or this book is my final word on Palestine or something like that. And so I think when I set both of those things down, I was like, just this book is what it is. And again, it's to your point earlier of it's a snapshot of a time. It's not purporting to tell a story other than the story that it's telling. And then you can use your time and writing and skills to write about whatever you need to in these months. And that's what I did. And so that's why the last couple of years I've done much more like op-ed-y, nonfiction kind of that I had never done before in my life, because it's what it sort of like the moment felt like it was calling for.
For sure. And I think that a lot of us, like even I'm not Palestinian, I've had this feeling of like, it feels absurd to do anything professional when all of this hell is unfolding.
It's really embarrassing. Yeah, I know. It does. Everything feels really, I think that's the term is like, or the word that I keep using is like, it all feels so frivolous. And I don't know how to reconcile that truthfully. Like I think, like I launched a book and I went on a book tour and I felt really grateful and privileged to be in a position where I could do that and could get to go places and meet people. And at the same time, while I was doing it, I was like, what matters? Like, I think a lot of us are having that conversation internally and with each other. It's like, what's the point of anything?
Yeah.
What matters here?
I've had it so many times.
Matters?
Yeah. I've had it so many times.
Yeah. I don't really know anymore. And I guess the only thing that makes that feeling better is to be able to say it aloud to people and then have them be like, oh, I totally hear you. And then you're like, okay, at least I'm not alone in this, But yeah, I have no idea. I mean, I think there's a part of me that's like, look, I mean, a big part of what has been happening aside from like the actual slaughter and erasure of people's lives is like a very concerted effort to, when you bomb every university and you bomb every library and you kill journalists, like you're also trying to erase archive and you're trying to erase living memory and you're trying to erase voices and you're trying, and so there is a part of me that's like, well, then I think it's extra important for Palestinians to be writing all their stories, because that's the only antidote to that erasure, right? Is to continue to be like, still here, still here, still here. So in that way, there's a part of me that's like, I really hope that this is like a drop in the bucket of like just contributing to that archive of, like Palestinian living and experiences. And, like, I mean, that's the diasporic experience is such a privileged one and in many ways, such a removed one. But I think it's like when it comes to Palestinians, like we're not diasporic by choice, nor by chance, nor because some random thing happened. Like it's, the fragmentation of Palestinian identity is very intentional, right? People aren't diasporic because they like the weather in Texas. They're there because they were displaced.
But Oklahoma.
Violently. But Oklahoma now is a totally different story. Yeah.
Wow. Well, I mean, I do think, narrative is like a kind of reclamation. And when I was reading your book and I was thinking about it in like contemporary context, even though it was written pre-October 7th and it's not a book that's about anything that's happening in Gaza currently, it definitely speaks to it. And I felt like this drop in the bucket idea and the importance of telling a story and kind of preserving these narratives, I think that's exactly what your book does. And it was moving to me. Like, I think maybe as a reader, you bring to a book like your own set of thoughts and ideas and experiences. And so it seems like the people who would be reading your book now would be bringing what's happening in Gaza to the read. And
I don't think there's any way not to. Yeah, I don't think there's any way not to. And it's been reflected back to me, things that I didn't even think of, where it's like, you're also, it's a story that really centers around bringing a life into the world. And I think that experience, like to see all that goes into bringing a child into the world, or all that can go into bringing a child into the world, and then to see just the complete disregard for life, children and otherwise, that juxtaposition is particularly haunting, and like my entry into, my daughter was like a year and a half in October of 2023. So like my new motherhood, like so much of my understanding and experience of mothering has been really impacted by what's happened the last couple of years in the genocide. Like how could it not? How could it not? Like it's colored. It's Palestine is superimposed on everything now, So yeah, I think that's a fair point. I mean, I think I can't even write. What did I read recently? All Fours by Miranda July. Like, I mean, it's like I can't read anything, even like things that have literally nothing to do without bringing that lens to it. It's everywhere.
Well, you've built an interesting career, and I'm going to hopefully get this right. But if I don't, please correct the record.
Of course.
You are a poet. You're a novelist, an essayist. You're now a memoirist, and you are a clinical psychologist.
Yes.
Did I miss anything?
No, that's it. Oh, I'm a professor at NYU, but I'm a professor of psychology. Yeah.
Oh, you are? Okay. So a professor as well. And I'm wondering, I always say this whenever I talk to a poet who has written in a different form. I can always feel the poetry in there. Like, poets are great. I love poets who write novels, because then I always tend to like them. There's something really... I also like poets' novels, but I think part of it is like there's so much attention on a line to line level. That's
you know
right.
what I mean?
That's
like
right.
Of just like we're also, I think, like poets are trained to really pick up on the granularity of things and like the most minute, sometimes ridiculous details. And I think that can make for really fun fiction.
Yeah.
Because then you're like drawn as the reader, like, or the characters being drawn or to like attend to certain things that otherwise would be passed over. So there's something that's really fun about that.
And what about the psychology, like this course of study that you undertook, but also like the work that you do with clients and stuff?
Yeah.
Like, that's got to be I can see the connection, the obvious connection.
Super useful. Yeah. No, it's funny because I think I was studying I wanted to be a lawyer, and then I very last minute changed to psych for no other reason than I had a friend that was doing graduate psych, and she said she liked it. And so it was a really random, or kind of a very serendipitous, that I ended up falling in love with it. And now in hindsight, I'm like, oh my God, what a perfect choice that ended up being, because they're so complementary. They're so like very much in the same wheelhouse of like, in both cases, narrative is the currency that you're working with, storytelling. In both cases, you're taking pieces, let's go back to the word cohere, like you're taking pieces that feel like they are not connected in any way. Like when someone comes in for therapy, I mean, rarely do people just have a very like courtroom transcript of their lives where they're like, this happened and that happened, and that's why this happened. Like people come in and they're just like, I hate my dad. I can't seem to have a good relationship. I can't sleep. I can't, like all these different pieces. And then part of your task as a therapist is to help just make sense. I mean, you're co-creating a sense of coherence. And that's so similar to writing, right? Like I never start out with like a perfect vision of what a book is going to be. It's like there's a snapshot. I think I know what an ending. I have a vague idea of a character. I think I want it to start in Paris. Like, like there's all these different pieces of it, and then you're writing towards, or you're working towards making it make sense. And I think both. Also, the other thing is to like the more you train as a writer, and the more you train as a therapist or as a clinical psychologist, and actually even as a professor, like you're training yourself to pay attention to the world, to attend to the world around you in a particular way, and to ask questions of like motive and desire, and what makes people do things the way that they do them, and what does that invoke? Like, how can I capture the emotion that somebody's trying to describe, or that I'm trying to describe? So that kind of emotional matching with language, I think, is like really helpful for writing.
Well, and then you started as a poet?
I started more, I mean, I've written for as long as I can remember. So like I was like a kid that wrote little stories when I was 6 and 7 and things like that. So I think I probably wrote like more stories as a child. But I do remember very vividly in 7th grade, I was in Maine for that year, and Mrs. Michaud, who was the English teacher, taught us a unit on poetry, and then had us put together a quote poetry book. And I just remember delighting in that task. And then from there, it was like, adolescence and just like really terrible, grungy poetry, and like very melodramatic. And then I actually think I stopped writing fiction. Like I think I was writing poetry through adolescence into my into college. And then when I moved back to the States after Beirut, after my undergrad, I found like an open mic, and then I kept doing poetry. And then when I was working on my dissertation, I started working on the fiction, because then I kind of needed to give myself something to reward myself for academic writing, which I despised. And so I started writing these stories, and then these stories felt connected, and then the stories turned into the novel.
And you are now, what, 4 books in? Like, how many poetry collections? The essay, 2 novels?
2 novels, 2 novels, memoir, so 3 prose, and then I think 5 poetry collections.
Wow. And do you have something in the pipeline? Like, what are you working on next?
So I'm actually really excited because I finally made some I started getting into a routine over the summer, which has been destroyed the last 2 weeks, but it's fine. Nobody panic. We're going to get it back. Basically it's a novel about a woman being called back to her hometown. So she's Arab American, being called back to her hometown in the Southwest because her sister has gone missing. And the disappearance of her sister kind of raises memories of her college roommate, the main character's college roommate, who was murdered their final semester, and they never knew who did it. And so it's very different than anything I've ever written, because it's got a little bit of like a thrillery aspect to it, but I hope for it to be also like an exploration of just like race in this country and what it means to be an Arab across different eras. And yeah, I mean, what it takes to erase and disappear a person. It's a real hard left turn, isn't it? It's like really, really unexpected. I know. I mean, I don't know. It's like, that's part of what's been exciting for me is I'm like, I don't know what the fuck I'm doing. I mean, this is so different than anything I've done before. And also I'm a multi-generational writer. Like that's what I do. And I partly do it because I don't have the attention span to stay with one character. So that's also going to be interesting to be like, no, we're just sticking with one fucking person. Yeah.
How do you find time to write with all that you have going on?
I don't. I mean, look, I for many years had a very diligent, very rigid 30 minutes a day practice. So the good news is I write very quickly. Well, the good news for myself is that I write very quickly and that I can drop in very quickly into what I'm working on. And that I trained myself from a very young age that I can do quite a bit in half an hour. Then COVID happened. I sort of lost the miscarriages, that shitty like year and a half. Then, daughter was born. Then most of my time was working on like finishing the memoir, then editing the memoir, which is like a different kind of quote unquote writing. So that's why I was sort of delighted by the summer, because this was the first summer in a while that I've been like, no, 30 minutes a day, just get back into it. And so that's my hope, is that if I can do a proper 30 minutes a day practice, then I'm good. It sounds like not much, but it's shocking how quickly you can write something in that time, or at least for me.
If you do it every day.
If you do it every day, because it's, again, you don't have to hype yourself up. Like if I write every 3 days, I lose more time remembering or getting back into what I was doing than I do if I just am every day it's like working out. Like I am at the best if I find ways to work out every day, which I don't ever do. But those brief pockets when I do it, it's the easiest. I don't negotiate with myself. I'm not trying to talk myself out of it. It's done. That's the whole thing of forming a habit, right? Like the psychology of forming a habit is you want there to be no choice. You don't want to have to, you want to cut out the time of you deciding whether to do the thing or not, because it's so automatic that you're going to do it. So that's what I'm trying to get back into with writing.
So last question, publishing this memoir, after publishing poetry and publishing novels and having success with it. I mean, you talked about people kind of bringing their own experiences to the read and then maybe communicating those or reflecting those to you. What has been the difference between publishing a novel and publishing a memoir? Have you been able to detect?
I mean, I think it's just kind of more, I'm trying to think of what the word is. Like, I don't know if this is about the memoir, but I feel more detached from the results of this launch, quote unquote, or this entry of the book into the world. But I have a feeling that's because I maybe just am a little bit more dissociated because of everything happening in the world. And the stakes of like how a book does don't seem that high compared to everything we're watching. So in a weird, fucked up way, it's actually a great headspace to be launching a book in. Because you're kind of like, I feel really connected when I do an event and someone comes up and we can have a genuine conversation about marriage or fertility or Palestine or something. It's beautiful. But then I'm not thinking about whether people are liking it or not liking it, because the stakes are nothing.
Right.
So it's weirdly kind of the perfect way to be launching a book. Like, I think with the novels, I've been much more like, oof, how does this feel? What are the, the review? I mean, I'm pretty good at, like, I block my Goodreads page and my Amazon reviews. I literally have them blocked whenever I have a new book out. I don't read any of that stuff. I don't read comments. I don't read DMs. I don't, which I'm sure means I miss some nice things, but it's like, it all feels distracting. But I think there's an even more of a level of detachment here where I'm also, this book came out in the world and I was like, oh, I'm getting a divorce. Like, so I'm still in the thing of, like, I'm still kind of authoring how this is playing out in, like, a day-to-day way. So it's just, it's just been, like, kind of an overwhelming time period. So I have a feeling it's the kind of thing that in a year or 2 or 3, I'll be like, oh my God, that book is really, people know a lot of things about it. So that's the other thing that I will say is different, is that I am taken aback sometimes by, in interviews, people bringing up something about, like, and the like abusive situation you were in when you're 18, and you're just like, what? And I quite literally forget that I've now written and published it.
It's out there.
It's out there. So that sometimes takes me aback when people, like, in casual conversation will bring something up and I'll be like, how did you know that?
Right.
And then they look at me like I'm an idiot and they're like, what are you talking about? You just published a memoir.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's going to take a little bit getting used to.
Well, it's a beautiful book.
Thank you. Thank you for reading it.
And I congratulate you. I wish you luck on this, like, Southwestern thriller that you're working on.
Thanks.
And I thank you for your time.
I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me.
All right, there we go. That was my conversation with Hala Alyan. Her memoir is called I'll Tell You When I'm Home. It's out there now from Avid Reader Press. Just a delight meeting her. She's a very gifted writer. Be sure to read her book. And you can learn more at halaalyan.com. Follow her on Instagram. One more time, the memoir is called I'll Tell You When I'm Home. Go get your copy right away. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen. Hit that subscribe button, and you can follow me on Blue Sky and Instagram. Sign up for my newsletter at bradlisti.substack.com. And if you love this show, if you had a good experience, if you want to help me keep making this program, you can support the show over at patreon.com/otherpplpod. If you want to join my book club or get an Other People t-shirt, you can do that at otherppl.com. And be sure to check out my new company, Deep Dive, at www.deepdive.audio. A reminder that the debut course from Deep Dive, How to Write a Novel, is available on sale through September 12th. Friday, September 12th is when the launch sale ends. So go get that course now and save 25% at www.deepdive.audio. Last but not least, if you have 2 minutes and you want to help me out a little bit, do me a quick favor. Please give this show a rating wherever you listen. Rate it, review it, say nice things. It helps me in the algorithm and it helps the program find new listeners. All right, so I think that does it for today. I will be back on Thursday, God willing, with my friend and co-host Mira Gonzalez for a brand new episode of Brad and Mira for the Culture, this podcast's weekly pop culture assessment. It is an irreverent, loose, unserious hangout show. And if that sounds good, if you need a break from serious stuff, check it out on Thursday. All right? Stay tuned.